Nancy Wallace-Lobbs, and I am a property manager. My company is KBN Homes Property Management. I have over 15 years of property management experience, strictly single family residence. I have managed many tenant problem, owner problem, and today we're going to talk about how you, as either wanting to manage your own properties or you wanting to find a property manager, some things that you should think about, ask, and that kind of thing. So we're going to get started right now, so I'm glad you're joining me today. And if you have any questions about property management or about leasing your rental, then just reach out to me. My phone number is 214-862-8215, and my email is nancy@kbnhomes.com. So thank you again, and let's get started. So when you're choosing whether it's an owner or a property, one of the things that's a big consideration that people don't think about is price. Now, if you're into real estate investing, of course, you've talked about, the ARV of a property and the 1% rule. If you buy a property for $150,000, then you should rent it for $1,500. But really, a lot of people that I have met have a property and they're just thinking that they need to charge rent to cover their mortgage, which is not the way it works. The other thing, a consideration that I've always used as an investor and a property manager is the drive time to a location. So if you're going to self-manage your properties, let's just say when you get that call about the broken toilet, you are not going to want to drive 2 hours to that location one way. So location is a consideration when you're wanting to self-manage or even hiring a property manager. You'll want to ask them what service area they go, because not all property managers go everywhere. Also, vendors in the service area. If you have a property that's 2 hours away, you'll want to cultivate some relationships with some vendors in that particular area. It's very unlikely that a vendor that lives on one side of town is going to travel to the other side of town to fix your leaky pipes. So just remember that if you're going to self-manage, price, drive time to a location, and then the last thing is in regards to homeowners association. So if some of you have properties in a homeowners association, you may or may not be aware that when you lease a property to a tenant, and the property is in an HOA, that tenant is responsible for the rules and regulations, but you as the owner and or property manager have to have something in the lease, and you have to have a system in place to make sure that the tenant is at all times in compliance with the HOA, and we're going to talk about this further. So as a property manager, I like to choose my owners and the properties that I'm going to lease. So I have found over the course of all the years I've been doing property manager, owners fall into two categories. You have your accidental owners. These are folks that for whatever reason, they couldn't sell their house, they had to get a job move, they didn't have enough equity, and they ended up leasing out their own home, their homestead property to a tenant. These owners, they'll be back at some point. It's their primary residence, and they have higher expectations of how tenants keep a house. So it's important to remember. And then, of course, you have our investors. Myself, other people that invest, they run or hopefully they're running their properties and the management of their properties like a business. So they know their property is a rental, so there'll be certain repairs and alterations and upgrades that they may or may not do to the property, depending on the type of ROI they're looking for. And these investors are going to have lower expectations of tenants as opposed to someone who is renting out their primary residence. So I like to interview my owners. The very first thing I like to talk to owners about, in addition to where the property is located, is what is their rental price expectations, especially when you're talking to an accidental owner. Remember, those are folks that have to move out for whatever reason and they're going to rent their primary residence. And many conversations I've had with these type of owners, where their mortgage payment might be $2,200, but unfortunately where their property is located, the rental market is only $1,500. So they have quite a big delta. Now, with the current market in the DFW area, rents have increased quite a bit. So this is just over the course of many years of owners that have had to lease out their home because of a job, and they had a job relocation. We like to talk about leasing fees. It's typical. We don't really talk about numbers. That's kind of against like the trade regulations and whatnot. So, I'm not going to stand up here and, spout off a bunch of fees or whatnot. But if you want to know more about our leasing fees, but I will tell you typical leasing fees are 1 month's rent. That's usually pretty standard for most property management companies. Inspections. Now, you have to remember a property manager, unless they are a licensed inspector, they don't really do inspections. They do walkthroughs. We walk a property to determine the condition upon move-in. We walk property to see what the condition is when people move out, but we're not inspectors. I've done plenty of walkthroughs. Being an investor, I'm familiar with plumbing problems. I mean, it's pretty obvious when the water is just overflowing in the toilet. That's a pretty obvious repair issue. But property managers are not inspections. So when they talk to you about doing inspections on your property, if they're good property managers, they're going to kind of let you know that they don't inspect. They just note the condition. We take lots of pictures and things like that. So it's important to complete an application to review the owner property. So I like my owners to actually fill out an application. We're going to talk about tenants filling out an application, but I like my owners to fill out an application. That gives me some more information about what their expectations are as for me as their property manager. So choosing owners and properties. So pre-screen owners. Now, true story, knows a lot of property managed folks, and they'll take property sight unseen. So what happens when they finally do get out to the property and they find there's big holes in the floor, the foundation needs to be fixed. Personally, I don't want to take on owners that don't want to take care of their properties. I like quality owners that take care of their properties, and they're literally not going to be slumlords. There are just a lot of issues with taking on a property like that. So we do require every owner to complete a property condition report, and then we want to know what kind of owner we're getting into. So we'll have them fill out an application, and then the owner will fill out a property condition report. Now, if you're familiar with the seller's disclosure, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about I want the owner to tell me what he thinks the condition is, how livable is it. And then what we'll do is we'll actually go to the property and we'll do a walkthrough because we want to see the condition. Now, if it's vacant, that's a lot easier. Okay, so I like to pre-screen my owners and their properties. When I take on a property, typically what happens is you get a phone call or get a referral. Someone wants you to manage the property. Great, all excited, love new business, love referrals. But I don't know anything about that owner, and I don't know anything about that property. So the first thing I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm going to have my owner fill out an application, kind of fill out what kind of expectations does he have. Not only I want him to be happy and satisfied, so I want to make sure that I know what his expectations are of a property management company and what he's looking for, and I want to make sure that my company can meet his expectations of how we're going to manage that property. So number one, I want to find out, just a little bit about him. Are we talking accidental owner? Because one of the things I will say about accidental owners is when they move out of their house and then you put a tenant in there, 9 times out of 10, what's going to happen is that homeowner, he or she got used to all the cracks and the creaks. And true story, we had a very wonderful home came into our portfolio, and it was a beautiful, beautiful home, a high dollar home, and the owners had gotten used to the electrical outlets in the kitchen snapping and crackling and popping. So when they moved out, of course, we put a tenant in there, and so what's the first thing that happens when they start plugging in their coffee maker and their can opener? Then what happens is they've got all this snapping and crackling on the electrical outlets. So Being a good property manager, we did need to get an electrician out there to make sure that there was no fire hazard to the tenant. And the owners just let me know that, hey, that had been happening for a long time. So they didn't really understand the need to repair it. So we always get a little laugh about that. It's just when you live in your home, you get used to all the creaks and noises that your house makes. And when a tenant moves in, it's all new to them. So it's all going to be magnified. So we want to make sure that we get those, and also working smoke detectors. A lot of times accidental owners, they don't keep up their own smoke detectors in their home. So we want to make sure that those are all in good working order. Also, if this house has not been a previous rental, we want to make sure that they have certain security features that are required by the Texas Property Code. And one of those that was kind of a new feature, I mean, a few years ago, but it's because I have rental houses and I had to do this myself. But basically, if you have a door to the garage, and it needs a peephole. So we had to go in and install peepholes in all of our rentals that didn't have that. So that is a requirement. It's considered a safety feature for the tenant. So reviewing about HOAs and restrictions on rentals, and there's been a lot of controversy over the last few years about that. There's been a few condominium associations that have required the property management company to provide credit report, criminal history background. Now, we never provide the credit report because we're not allowed to give that out, but we did have to send in, if someone wanted to lease in a particular area and the HOA had requirements about, they wanted to know, you know, if the person that was going to be living in the community had a criminal background. So we did share that information, but we didn't share any credit information. We also want to go through the tenant, the applicant screening process, the do's and don'ts. There are transfer fees. You know, if there's amenities in the community, generally there's a transfer fee from the owner to the tenant and then from tenant to tenant. So we have to make sure that we incorporate all of those fees into the lease, because typically the tenant does pay for that. And I can let you know that there's two big complaints from HOAs of having a property in an HOA. Number one is yard maintenance, the shrubs, the weeds in the flower bed. I can't tell you how many number of letters and emails I have written in regards to weeds in the flower beds. It's crazy. And then the second complaint, the second highest complaint we got from HOAs was the trash canister was left out front. It's like, you know, the trash gets picked up on Wednesday and they want those trash cans rolled to the side of the house. You can't, you know, they have certain, some HOAs have certain requirements. So as a property manager, we have to be aware of that and we have to be on top of that, because if the owner gets fined, because that's who they're going to fine is the owner, then the property manager has to go back and collect that money from the tenant. So we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to forms and how all of that works. So that's the end of this segment. So stay tuned for our next one. Thank you.